Hi everyone, and welcome to the next video in the Endgame series. This time we're going to look at the idea of domination in the endgame. What this means is a situation in which one player's piece or pieces are being dominated by his opponents, which of course is usually a big advantage. There were some examples of this in the last part I did on this series, where a black knight in a Caro-Kann structure was getting dominated by a white bishop and thus being forced to stay passive at the edge of the board. But it can also happen with knights in much more open positions, and this game is a great example. It was played at the European Team Championships in 2005 between Dutch Grandmaster Jan Timman with the white pieces and many-time Polish national champion GM Thomas Marowski with black. Timman played the English opening with c4, and I'm just going to skip through the first 40 or so moves to get to the point I want to talk about, which is here. Knight c5 has just been played, and now g takes f4 check, g takes f4. And here Timman is a pawn down and striving to hold out for a draw, which due to the limited material shouldn't be too difficult. And here Markowski played king d8, but this was a blunder, believe it or not, as now he loses his knight. The correct course of action was knight c2 check, followed up with knight a3 to b5, and black will be able to milk the position for a long time and might be able to get something out of it. Markowski's move with king d8 instead allows king d2, and there's now no way for the black knight to escape, and it's being dominated by the white knight, and the king can move now in for the kill on the knight here, because the a6 and d5 are being covered by the knight here on d3, and there's no knight c6 of course due to the pawn, and the king can cover the remaining moves down here, and knight a2 is no good once the white king gets to b2. So now suddenly white has a big edge in the position, but again the limited material matters, and this time it's in securing a draw for black. Play continued king c7, king c3, knight a2 check, king b2, and knight b4. If instead king d6, now comes knight d3, and the black knight remains trapped. So knight b4, and now king b3, and the knight is gone. Knight d5 is the best option black has, and it's sufficient to draw after e takes d5 and c takes d5, and 5 moves later the draw was agreed, and it was a costly slip from Markowski that just goes to show, even in highly simplified positions, you can't let your concentration waver for even a moment. Had there been another piece on the board for each side, it may well have spelt doom for black here. The idea of domination can also play a role on a wide open board, and Karpov gave a great example at the 1988 Olympiad against Lubomir Fatatnik, where the following position was reached. Karpov had white here, and Lubomir Fatatnik's a great player from Czech Republic, and with careful play black should be able to draw this. However, Fatatnik tried to force the issue a bit, and here played h5. And after g takes h5 check and king takes h5, Karpov answered with king g3, which is a strong positional move as to be expected from him, because it cuts the king off at the side of the board and keeps him on the h file here. And Fatatnik played king h6 to stop rook g7, and okay, my king d6, knight f4, king e7, and king h5. And what do you think Karpov played here? Stop the video now if you want longer to think. King f6 is the move that he was played, and he was rightly uninterested in winning the two black pawns in exchange for his h-pawn, unless he can do so without allowing the knight back into the vicinity of the king in order to defend. And the point of this move is that it forces knight d5 check because anything else, and black is losing after king takes f7, which Karpov didn't now play either. Here his move was king e5, which allows a repeated position if Fatahnik plays king h6, but he played instead king h4. And now came rook f3, because it was attacked by the king and it's tied to the defense of the h-pawn. And here came a slip from Fatahnik with knight b6. Better was knight e7, which should hold for a draw. Okay. After knight b6, the knight is too far away from the action of the game. And Karpov finally takes the pawn, and now the time is right because, you know, as always in the endgame, there's no need to rush things. And as I mentioned in an earlier video, your opponent will often make things worse for himself given the chance, and this is a prime example of that. After king takes h3 comes king takes e6, and suddenly now it becomes apparent that the knight is unable to come back over to the king's side to defend the black king. Fatahnik played knight c4, and this is really the best he can hope for. If instead king g3, now comes rook c7, preventing the knight from making progress over towards the king, and this is a table-based win in 22 moves for white. King g4 is also bad instead of knight c4. If you want to try and spot why, then stop the video now. Rook b7 is the reason why, with a winning advantage to white, because the knight is lost. If it goes to a4 or c4, then rook b4 wins it, and the king is covering d5 and d7. And if knight a8, then it's trapped, and the white king can just move in and take it. And if knight c8, then king d7, and again the knight is lost. So it would be completely losing as well. So knight c4 is the best that white can hope for. But now comes rook f3 check, king g4, and rook d3, again with the idea being to control the black knight. And in actual fact, this is a table-based win for white in 30 moves, no matter how black plays. Fatahnik put up some resistance, but after a further 8 moves he had to resign. It went as follows: king g5, which is the correct move to hold out for as long as possible. And now king d5 attacking the knight. So knight b6 check, king e5, now knight c4 check, king e4, knight b6, and now a very accurate move from Karpov, rook d8, which is stopping knight c8 and the return of the knight to the king's side. And the only move to maintain resistance now is knight c4, but now comes a rook d4, forcing knight b6, and now king e5, and white is completely winning all of a sudden. And the point is that there's no way for black to stop the king from coming in and taking the knight, after which it's an easy win, of course. Fatahnik tried knight c8, but after king e6, knight a7, and king d7, he resigned, saying that there's no way to save his knights. There's no knight b5 because of rook d5 check, and rook d5 to a5 is coming next to win the knight. So it was a fine example of endgame skill from the brilliant ex-world champion Anatoly Karpov. And in part 2 we'll look at the final example for this installment of the series, and I'll feature an endgame from Karpov's longtime rival Garry Kasparov. Okay, that's the end of part 1.